The President of the United States, Donald Trump, made a very important announcement. This news caused great trouble for a big international meeting. This meeting was the G20 Summit, where leaders from the world's most powerful countries come together to talk about global issues. It was scheduled to take place in South Africa, a country working hard to host a successful event. But after President Trump's words, the plans for the summit were thrown into chaos. The world watched, unsure of what would happen next or how this would affect international relations. This book tells the story of a big problem between countries. It is a diplomatic crisis that shows how complex relations can be. This crisis involves two strong nations: the United States, a global superpower, and South Africa, an important country in Africa. They have a difficult past, full of complicated events and historical disagreements. Now they also have very different ideas about the truth of an important matter. Each country tells its own story about the situation, and these stories do not match at all. This difference in views makes finding a solution very hard. We will look closely at this situation from all sides. We will see how one announcement from a leader can create a deep divide between nations. It is a story about land, about justice for its people, and about how countries talk to each other on the world stage. It shows how words from powerful people can quickly change global events and alliances. This is not just about two countries. It affects many others who watch from around the world. The important questions raised by this crisis are relevant for everyone who cares about fairness and peace. 2. The President's decision. President Donald Trump made a big announcement on November 7, 2025. He used Truth Social to share his decision. He said the United States would not send any officials to the G20 Summit. This meeting was set for November 22nd and 23rd in Johannesburg, South Africa. This was a major change. Earlier, President Trump had said he might not go, but Vice President J.D. Vance would represent the U.S. Now the message was clear: no American official would attend. President Trump stated, "It is a total disgrace that the G20 will be held in South Africa. Afrikaners are being killed and slaughtered, and their land and farms are being illegally confiscated. No U.S. government official will attend as long as these human rights abuses continue." He also said the U.S. looked forward to hosting the G20 Summit in Miami, Florida in 2026. This meant a complete stop to diplomatic engagement for the summit. South Africa, the host, would have no representation from Washington. This was important because the United States is the world's largest economy. This boycott showed a clear break in relations. The decision was not sudden. Tensions between President Trump's government and South Africa had grown. On August 1, 2025, President Trump put a high tax on all South African goods. This 30% tariff was the highest for any sub-Saharan African nation. This tax greatly hurt South Africa's economy. The U.S. is South Africa's second largest trading partner. South Africa tried to negotiate, offering to buy U.S. natural gas and invest in American industries. But these offers were not successful. The tariffs remained. Now, with no U.S. officials going to the G20, the relationship was more difficult. The world watched as the largest economy cut all official contact with the summit's host. 3. An important meeting. The G20 is a very important group of countries. It brings together the 19 biggest economies in the world, plus the European Union and the African Union. These members together make more than 85% of all the money in the world. They meet every year to talk about global economic challenges. These challenges include things like creating more jobs, ensuring stable money systems, and making sure trade between countries is fair. The G20 aims to find common solutions and coordinate policies to help the world's economy grow and stay stable. Because of its members' power, the G20's decisions can greatly affect everyone. This year, for the first time, South Africa is leading the G20. The country took on this big responsibility on December 1, 2024. South Africa will stay the G20 president until December 1, 2025. As president, South Africa wants to highlight important issues under its theme, Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability. A main part of their focus is African development. This means working for fair economic growth across Africa, helping countries to have enough food, and using new technologies like artificial intelligence in good ways for everyone. This is a chance for South Africa to bring African voices and needs to the global stage. However, President Donald Trump's recent decision to boycott the G20 summit creates a major problem. The United States is the world's largest economy, and its absence from the meeting is a serious diplomatic issue. Without the U.S., it becomes very hard for the G20 to reach strong agreements and work together. The boycott damages South Africa's leadership role and its efforts to push for its development agenda. It makes it difficult for South Africa to champion African issues and achieve its goals for the summit. The whole event's success is now in danger because a key member will not attend. This makes international cooperation much harder and leaves many questions unanswered about global leadership. 4. The American story. President Donald Trump clearly stated his reasons for the United States' full boycott of the G20 summit. He spoke directly about what he saw as a severe crisis in South Africa. President Trump claimed that white farmers, known as Afrikaners, were facing widespread attacks and even being killed. He also alleged that their valuable land and farms were being taken from them unfairly and illegally. For President Trump, these actions were not just isolated incidents. He called them a massive human rights violation. He stressed that the situation was so bad it amounted to genocide. He declared that the United States would not send any government officials to the G20 meeting in South Africa. This boycott would continue as long as these serious human rights issues, as he described them, did not stop. His public statements aimed to show the American people why such strong action was needed. President Trump offered what he considered proof for his claims of land theft. He pointed to a new South African law, the Expropriation Act of 2025. He said this legislation showed that the South African government itself was involved in discriminatory practices. This act gives the government the power to take private land for purposes that benefit the public. However, the part that troubled President Trump was that the law included conditions where the land could be taken with very little or even zero compensation. He argued that this was not proper land reform, but rather a direct way to steal property from its owners without fair payment. From his perspective, the Expropriation Act was a key tool in what he described as the persecution of white farmers. He presented this law as a central piece of evidence for the human rights crisis he identified. In response to these concerns, the Trump administration took a significant step regarding immigration policy. In 2025, some white South Africans, believing they were in danger, began arriving in the United States through the existing refugee program. This opened the door for further action. The following year, 2026, the Trump administration announced a dramatic change to the overall refugee admissions limit. The total number of refugees allowed into the U.S. was cut to just 7,500, the lowest figure on record. Crucially, a large portion, the majority, of these limited refugee spots were specifically designated for white South Africans. This policy shift clearly showed the U.S. government's intention to provide a safe haven for this group. President Trump made it clear that his administration viewed these white South Africans as a persecuted population in need of urgent American protection, shaping the country's humanitarian efforts based on his specific concerns. 5. The South African story. The South African government strongly disagreed with the claims made by the American president. They said his statements were completely wrong and not based on facts. President Cyril Ramaphosa clearly stated that no white farmers were being persecuted or facing systematic violence. He called these claims completely false and untrue for his country. South African officials explained the true purpose behind their new land law, called the Expropriation Act of 2025. This important law was not made to harm anyone or take land unfairly. Instead, it was created to fix long-standing problems from South Africa's difficult history. For many years, during the apartheid era, old laws made sure that most land was owned by a small white population. Black South Africans, who are the majority of the country's people, were left with very little land. This created deep unfairness and economic inequality across the nation. The new law aims to make land ownership fairer for everyone. Officials described it as an important step to update old laws that came from the apartheid period. The Expropriation Act provides clear guidelines for when land can be used for public benefit or public interest. It also sets out how people will be paid for their land. The law has rules to protect all landowners, including mandatory discussions before land is taken and the right to challenge decisions in court. This shows it is not about sudden seizures, but a careful legal process that includes strong legal protections for property owners. The South African government stated that its country is working hard to achieve fairness and equality for all citizens. They want to correct past injustices and ensure a better future where everyone has equal opportunities. They believe their approach to land reform is a way to achieve socioeconomic rights for all, helping to build bridges and address the impact of colonialism on the African continent. The government also highlighted that even after apartheid ended, white South Africans often still enjoy a much better standard of living compared to the black majority. International human rights groups have welcomed this new law, seeing it as a positive step towards justice and human rights. 6. A difficult history. To understand the problem of land in South Africa today, we must look at its past. For many years, the country had very unfair laws, especially during a time called apartheid. These old laws were the main reason for the big differences in who owned land. Before apartheid, in 1913, a law called the Natives' Land Act was passed. This law was very strict. It said that black Africans could only own a small 7% of all the land in the country. This was a tiny piece for the majority of the population. Most of the good land went to the small white population. Later, in 1936, another law, the Native Trust and Land Act, made a small change. It said black South Africans could own a little more, about 13% of the land. But this was still very unfair. It meant that a few white people owned almost 90% of the land, while most black people had to live on small, crowded areas. The apartheid government, which ruled from 1948 to 1994, made this problem even worse. They forced many black families to leave their homes. They had to move from fertile lands to special areas, often called Bantustans. These areas were usually poor and far from cities or jobs. Many people lost their homes and their communities. For example, over 60,000 people were forced out of one area called District 6 alone. This history of forced removals and unfair land laws created a huge problem. It meant that black South Africans, who are the majority, could not own land and build wealth like white people could. This made life very hard for them. Even today, many years after apartheid ended, this history still affects South Africa. A report from 2017 showed the big difference. White people are only about 7% of the country's population, but they own 72% of the farming land. In contrast, black South Africans are about 81% of the population, yet they own only about 4% of the farming land. This big difference did not happen by chance. It happened because of the old unfair laws from colonial times and the apartheid era. This deep history of land inequality is the main reason why South Africa's government is trying to change land ownership today. They call this land reform. The goal is to fix the wrongs of the past and create a fairer country for everyone. 7. Numbers and rules. The previous chapters talked about President Donald Trump's claims regarding South Africa. He spoke about attacks on white farmers and illegal land taking. But a closer look at the facts showed a different picture. South African police shared important numbers about farm murders. In the first 3 months of 2025, there were 6 farm murders. Of these 6, only 1 victim was white and 5 were black. Before this, in the last 3 months of 2024, there were 12 farm murders. Only 1 of these victims was a white farm owner. These police statistics were special because they showed the race of the victims. The police started sharing this information because of President Trump's repeated claims about genocide. An organization called AfriForum, which works for white Afrikaner farmers, also collected data. They recorded 49 farm killings between April 2023 and March 2024. This number was a very small part of all murders in South Africa during that time, less than 1%. It is important to know that AfriForum's numbers did not include killings of black farmers or workers. This difference in reporting can change how people understand the situation. In February 2025, a South African court also said that claims of white genocide were clearly imagined, meaning they were not based on reality. Next, we looked at the new Expropriation Act of 2025. This is a law about land. President Ramaphosa signed it into law in January 2025. The law lets the South African government take land for public use or public interest. Some people worried that land would be taken without payment. However, the law has clear rules. It states that land can be taken with very little or no money only in special, limited cases. For example, this could happen if the land is abandoned, or if it is state land not being used, or if its value increased a lot because of government money. It also applies to land held just for profit, or communal land that was historically taken from people. Experts say this new law is a way to update older laws from the apartheid time. The old laws were not fair to many people. The Expropriation Act of 2025 wants to make the process clear and fair for everyone. It includes important legal protections for landowners. Before land can be taken, there must be talks and official notices. Landowners can also go to court to challenge the decision. This means the government cannot just take land quickly without a legal process. South African officials say that this power to take land for public use with fair rules is similar to laws in other countries, like eminent domain in the United States. Finally, international human rights groups also looked at the new law. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights, a big human rights organization, welcomed the Expropriation Act in May 2025. They praised South Africa for this new law. They said it helps to give people fair access to land, fix old problems from history, and make sure people have their social and economic rights. The Commission also noted that the law has safeguards against arbitrary expropriation. This means it protects people from unfair land seizures. They said the law follows South Africa's own constitution and international human rights rules. This international view was very different from the claims made by President Trump about the law causing human rights problems. The official numbers and legal analyses paint a different picture from the one presented earlier. They show that the situation is more complex and has legal protections and historical reasons. 8. The end of the story. The boycott of the G20 summit created a big problem in how countries talk to each other. When President Donald Trump announced the U.S. would not send any officials, it showed a new and difficult way of doing things in global politics. As the world's largest economy, the U.S. absence made it much harder for other nations to work together on important global issues. This action led to many questions about how countries should act and what international rules they should follow. It also brought out big differences in ideas about right and wrong in the world. There were two very different stories about the situation in South Africa. President Trump's administration gave its reasons for the boycott, focusing on claims about land and safety. South Africa's government, led by President Ramaphosa, strongly denied these claims and explained its laws and history. Each country had its own version of the truth. This made it very hard to find a shared understanding or a way to move forward peacefully. The diplomatic discussion became very complicated because of these different viewpoints. This event left many important questions unanswered. People worldwide wondered about justice and fairness for all citizens. They thought about how past events, like South Africa's history of land ownership, connect to today's problems. They also considered who holds power in international relations and how that power is used. The boycott showed that even when countries try to work together in forums like the G20, deep disagreements can still stop progress. It highlighted how difficult it can be to solve big international challenges when facts are seen differently. This diplomatic crisis will likely have long-term effects on global cooperation. It makes us think about trust and respect between nations. What do you think is the most important lesson we can learn from this story about international relations?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.